everyone, and welcome back to my channel, where today I am doing a Booktuber Recommendations video. This video was actually supposed to go up last week, but upon rewatching I didn't really like it, so I decided I would do it again. Thus no video last week, but here we are. So this is a Booktuber Recommendations video, so basically I'm going to be discussing books that I picked up based off other booktubers. I would have to say that I'm quite... I don't want to say set in my reading ways, but I do know what my interests are. I do know where they lie. I do have a pretty good feeling at this point for what I will like and what I won't like. But that doesn't mean I'm set entirely in my ways. I do still like to experiment. And the thing that's fun about BookTube is that there's so much variety, and people are so excited and so passionate about the books that they read that they're very good at selling them. So every once in a while I will pick up a book based off of a few YouTubers, and it's especially interesting when it comes from YouTubers where I tend to follow them not so much for the books they read, because maybe we don't share the same interests. For example, I follow quite a lot of fantasy readers, and I don't read fantasy, but their personalities are so bubbly and fun, and they have so much energy, and that's very contagious, and I just really like watching that, even if I know I won't read the books that they're reading. But every once in a while you'll have someone who recommends a book that sounds interesting and maybe is even not so much within their normal interests, but they enjoyed it, and so I think maybe I can enjoy it. One such book would be a recommendation from Kayla from Lala Reads. Her and I have very, very different reading tastes, but her videos are excellent, absolutely excellent. And so when she read this book, Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incidents by Donnie, Eichar, I picked it up because, like her, I very much like mountain stories. I like adventure stories. I like mountain stories. And this just sounded super interesting. And what is it? It's the story of these 9 Russian students who go on it's not a hiking incident, but a hiking trip. It's them wearing, like cross-country skis and going into the depths of Russian Siberian winter and trying to tent, and it's an adventure basically. It's them trying to fulfill a requirement for an adventure certificate, and you can see basically the vibe from this photo. But basically they go off, and all of them are killed in sort of what seemed like a freak nature accident. And the thing that's so interesting about the story is the way they died, or basically the way they were found after they had died. Their tent was ripped from the inside. None of them were in the tent. They were all spread out along the landscape. And basically some of them had suffered what seemed like very, very horrible deaths. So basically how they died was never solved. And so Donnie Eichar, who became very interested in this incident, decided to go to Russia himself and sort of retrace their path and try and figure it out for himself. And it was just so gripping and exciting. The thing I liked about this is that it reads almost like a thriller. It's so gripping that even though you know that these students die, as you read the pages, you think, okay, if I turn the page, maybe they'll survive. Oh, maybe if I read this, they'll live. Like, you actually convince yourself that you can save them from reading, which was really, really fun. And so I really enjoyed this one. Another YouTuber would be Jen Campbell, which very, very famous, super lovely, has the best, most just wonderful videos. But again, we don't really share the same reading tastes. She very much likes poetry and fairy tale retellings, and I think she's a lot more romantic than I am. And I don't mean romantic in like romance, kiss, kiss, kiss. I mean romantic, like has a very much more hopeful view of the world, I think, which is maybe comes from the whole her whole liking of fairy tales. I'm very much a realistic, very much super logical. I tend to look on, I don't want to say the negative, but I'm very much aware of the negative of society, unfortunately. Yeah, so we don't exactly share the same reading taste, but I wanted to take a dive with when she recommended one of her favorite books and an author that she really adores and respects and appreciates and actually has a friendship with, and that is Michel Faber's The Book of Strange New Things. And this one I actually liked. Not every aspect of it, but I did like this. It's basically about a man who goes on a mission to another planet to teach English to the alien species of that planet. And the thing that's interesting about this is that he's not actually, you know, just a simple English teacher. He's actually a preacher. So he decides to teach these alien species about the Bible. And for me, who is very anti-organized religion, I think it's very interesting that even though the Bible has created so much chaos in our own world, it's basically been the source of all these great wars, human suffering. I mean, no one can even agree on is Jesus the prophet? Is Muhammad the prophet? Should we be following the Quran? Should we be following the Bible? Within the Bible, should we be following the New Testaments, the Old Testaments? It's a disaster. The Bible and all religion has been a disaster on our planet. So the idea that we would try again with a new alien species is just, that was super, super interesting. And I really enjoyed that part, because even just this character, he goes to teach the alien species, but he wasn't the first character to interact with them. There was another preacher who I believe taught with the King James version of the Bible, which is a very much heavily debated translation, because people think it's not very accurate, it's not really well done, but it's still widely used. And I believe it was something like that, or else the first preacher was Lutheran and not this type of Protestant, or etc., etc. So even just within two people, there's disagreement about which Bible to use. And so to think that they would still try and use this book to teach an alien species is just mind-boggling. And I thought that part was very fascinating. Really enjoyed that part. However, if you can see the cover, there's actually two faces, a man and a woman. This is actually kind of a love story. He leaves his wife behind on the planet Earth, and the planet Earth is basically under full disaster with tsunamis and earthquakes and volcanoes. Like, nature is just killing the planet, and that love story is... I wasn't as intrigued by that part, we'll just say. As I said, I think Jen Campbell's a little bit more romantic than I am. But the Bible part, the alien species part of this book, I really, really enjoyed. I don't know, would I read another Michel Faber book? I think it would depend on the plot of the book. I do like his writing. I mean, this is easy to read. I was definitely captivated. So I would have to see what his other books. But this book, I did enjoy. However, another book recommended by Jen Campbell that she really absolutely adored, I absolutely hated. I hated this book so much. And that's The Blue Girl by Laurie Foos. Laurie Foos. I absolutely hated this book. What is it? It's about this, a mother and her daughter, they go to the lake and they see that this blue girl, so a girl who's literally blue, the color blue, is drowning. And the daughter goes and saves this girl, and sort of after that they kind of create this relationship with this blue girl. And basically this blue girl is this mysterious, she lives in the forest with, they don't quite know who. Does she live with her mother? Does she has a family? Does she have a traditional family? Like, how does that work? But it's rumored that if you feed this girl these sort of like mooncakes, she sort of like takes in your secrets, and that's sort of supposed to help you. But what I hated about this book is, while I liked the premise, which is why I wanted to read this in the first place, I hated the way it was done. It's done by multi-perspective, where you have the original daughter that saved the girl, then you have her two friends, and then you have the mother's perspective, and then you have the perspective of the two mothers of the two friends. And so you have 6 perspectives in this book, and you never really go into anyone's personal feelings or emotions or anything. You just, as soon as like it gets a little difficult to describe what's happening, the author just switches perspective, because it's easier to do that. So I mean, I hated this book. I didn't like this. I want to get rid of it so badly. Another book from a booktuber who I very much enjoy watching, and that's oh my gosh, I just watched him like 10 minutes ago. Simon Savage from Savage Reads. All these booktube channels, obviously, I will put in the description box below, like I always do when I mention books or other channel names. But yeah, we don't have the same taste at all in books, none whatsoever. But this one, he was so excited about it that I wanted to try it, and that's The Trauma Cleaner by Sarah Krasnostein, which I just read very recently. So if you looked at my previous February wrap-up, you'll get a lot more thoughts about this. But basically, it's just a nonfiction about a woman who became a trauma cleaner and how she became a trauma cleaner. And you go into her past when she was born as Peter, and she was adopted into a family where she was subsequently abused by the father, physically abused by the father. Then she leaves the house, gets married, has children, abandons her children, joins the gay community, realizes the gay community is not exactly the right fit for her, switches and decides that she wants to be a woman. She doesn't want to be Peter anymore, so she becomes trans. And just her transition and having to go through being a prostitute, owning a brothel, experiencing sexual abuse, basically just a horrible, horrible background. But while I respect her background and I respect her name's Sandra, and I respect how much she had to go through, I wasn't sympathetic to her. I didn't think she was as good a person as the author Sarah Krasnostein tries to make her. I also didn't like how Sarah Krasnostein inserted herself into this book. I thought that wasn't necessary at all. It's just like, you're writing a story about Sandra, we don't need to hear about you, basically, which sounds harsh. But I think it's a legitimate criticism of the book. So this too, I didn't really enjoy this. So I think in terms of Simon and my relationship, I think I'll just stick to watching him and not really picking up the books he recommends, because I think while he has a very good audience and it's good that he can share those, I just don't think we have the same interests. So love his videos, love his channel. I didn't love this book. However, to move on to a channel that actually I have shared quite a few interests with, that would be Russell from Ink and Paper blog. He is so enthusiastic. I love his fight to acknowledge and to encourage people to buy from independent bookstores and to go to their library, and I think that's really, really fantastic. And he's very good about picking up, the brand new and introducing you to all of it. So an example of that would be the book My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. I'm pretty sure he's one of the first booktubers who picked up this book and read it and recommended it. So if you want like right away immediate recommendations for what's coming out, he has a very good eye for what's good, and so definitely recommend him. But yeah, My Dark Vanessa, which is about a girl who had a relationship with her teacher when she was in boarding school, and 10 years or so later, he's in the news for having purportedly sexually abused another student. And so Vanessa, our main character, is going through this book and really try and reflect on the fact that maybe while she thought the relationship was romantic in nature, she has to reflect on the fact that maybe it was sexual abuse, and it just goes through her emotions behind that book. And this was excellent. It was very, very good. It's written very well. For me, I've said this numerous times, but the sex scenes I think are impeccably written. They're realistic, both in emotions but also in just the act itself, which I think is lacking in a lot of sex scenes in other books, where they just go for like the hard impact, like, oh, he did this to me, da da da, and it just sounds like it just sounds too forced in a lot of books. But here was impeccably done, and I think her exploration of these very serious emotions was very, very well done. So I can definitely thank Russell for introducing this book to me. I thought very, very good. Another book that he introduced that I enjoyed, it's not my favorite, but I enjoyed the experience. I appreciate having read the book, although not exactly my taste, but it was, I enjoyed it to an extent. That's Heartbreaker by Claudia Dey, who's a Canadian author. And this was her debut book, and I think it's still the only book that she's written. But this is about a woman who sort of ran off in her car and just kept driving until it finally broke down, and she found herself kind of in the middle of nowhere, Canada, and she's picked up by this community which has an almost sort of cult-like presence to it, although I would say it's more of a community. But it just goes into this woman's life. She ends up marrying a man in the community. She has a daughter, and when the daughter is in her teens, the mother just one day walks out and just leaves. And it basically follows three perspectives, which are quite interesting. It has the daughter's perspective, it has the perspective of one man in the community, and then it actually has the perspective from the dog. And with every perspective, you get more and more information about why the mother left. And it sort of leads to this very mysterious reading that was quite interesting. So this is definitely a book I would not have picked up without Russell's recommendation. And I think if you like this kind of book, you'll definitely enjoy it. One more book that Russell recommended that I absolutely did really enjoy was Sandrine Collette's Nothing But Dust. This is actually translated from the French, and although I could have read it in French, I did decide to go for the English. And this was fantastic. It's basically, if you've ever read Marguerite Duras' The Lover, which is about a mother, a very, very harsh, stern, strict mother raising her kids in French Vietnam. And if you liked that and enjoy that, this is basically that book, but in Argentina's Patagonia. So it's basically just this woman who's very strict, very hard, very rigid, very stern, who raises her, I believe it was 3 boys, and one of them's a little bit more sensitive than the other 2 boys, and he's the youngest, and he kind of got picked on, and eventually he goes into the Patagonia himself to sort of work things out. And I think the descriptions of the characters were so spot on, and the description of the Patagonian landscape, which I have been to Patagonia, was just so beautiful and very, very well done. So this was a book that I would definitely highly recommend. I was quite surprised by this. It was really good. And it's interesting because Sandrine Colette, when I looked at her other books, they're very different from this. This was a very big departure for her, from what I can tell. And so while I wouldn't have read the other books, this one was fantastic. So I was very, very happy that Russell was able to recommend this, because I loved it. And last is a book recommended by Ariel Bissett, who, it's interesting because when I first started watching her, she was still reading a lot of YA. So when I first started watching BookTube, YA channels were the primary channel. Those were the ones with all the views, so those were the ones that YouTube kind of showed into the forefront. So even though I don't read YA, growing up, YA wasn't even a category, and I kind of skipped that literary genre to begin with. I went from reading like Nancy Drew straight to reading Les Mis. There was no, young adult for me. I just went straight into reading the classics when I was young. And so when I first started watching her, she was just reading YA, but lately, having done her master's, she's sort of broadened out from that. And one book she read was Motherhood by Sheila Heti. And this, I have to admit, impacted me greatly. And the thing is that I don't think this book is particularly spellbinding in terms of the writing. The writing is standard. It's familiar. It's not full of lyrical prose. I actually think there are some parts that are just kind of like a little bit even eye-rolling. But I think it was, for me, the right book at the right time, where the message behind the book is more important than the writing of the book. So Motherhood is basically this woman in her 30s who is exploring the fact that she might not want children. And she spends the entire book going back and forth between wanting children and not wanting children. And while that can seem almost wishy-washy for some readers, and I can understand them thinking that. I think in terms of as a woman, for me, I'm in the same age group as this character. I have the same sort of feelings towards children, and there is indeed a going back and forth that you can go through. I mean, some people are very clear, I do not want children, and some people are very clear that yes, they do want children. But there are people like me and this character who fall in that in between, where depending on where our life situation is, we can go either way. So maybe right now, if you don't have a job and you don't even have a boyfriend, you might think, okay, yeah, I'm not gonna have children. But then as soon as you get a good job and you do have a relationship, and maybe they're very endearing to children, and maybe that can be like, okay, well, maybe it would be nice to have kids. Or maybe your job is so good and now you have a career and you think, oh, well, why would I have children when I have this fantastic career? So, you know, there's that middle ground where you can go either way. And I think this character really, and Sheila Heti really portrays that sort of back and forth so well. So again, while the writing is, to me, so-so, the message within the book, I think, was absolutely fantastic. And I think if you're I think even in your 20s, you can read this. If you're in your 20s and you kind of want to get a feel of what it's like to be, you know, a single woman in your 30s, this is a very good book to read. And it definitely, if you're in your 30s and you're going through these same sort of thoughts, I thought this was very well done. It just very well portrays the emotions and the thought process that goes behind deciding whether you are or whether you're not going to have children. So this was definitely a very good recommendation from Ariel Bissett, a book I definitely would not have picked up without her being so enthusiastic about it. So yeah. So that's just an example of some books I've read based off of other Booktuber recommendations. I look very much forward to having more in the future. I haven't read anything since this pile of books, so it might be a long time before I make another one of these kind of videos. But definitely, as soon as I read books from other booktubers, I will have no qualms about doing this again. So anyway, that's it for today. This actually ended up being a longer video than an original video, interestingly enough, but I think this one's a little better. So anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!